Different driving instructors have different opinions on when to use neutral, park and the handbrake, also known as the parking brake, when driving an automatic car. But what do you actually need to do to pass the driving test in Great Britain? What can damage the car? And does it matter what sort of automatic you have? Firstly, the most common question I hear on this subject is, if I'm waiting in traffic or at traffic lights and the car is stationary, do I have to be in park or neutral with the handbrake on? Well, the simple answer is no, it's not in the standard. Your driving examiner isn't looking out for this. They want to make sure that you are safe and legal and that you're in full control of the car at all times. The method you use to achieve this is flexible, but if you were in park with the handbrake on and traffic started moving and it took you too long to get going yourself, you could get marked down for this on the driving test in Great Britain. And if you did it bad enough, you could even fail, or if you did it repeatedly, you could fail. But for that to happen, you would have to be very slow. Okay, so why is it then that so many driving instructors advise you use park or neutral and the handbrake, the parking brake, whenever you're stationary? The saying is, when a pause becomes a wait, use the handbrake. Well, you don't have to do this. It's just belt and braces. The idea is, if someone from behind hits you, you're less likely to go forwards far enough to be involved in a secondary collision with something in front of you. But bear in mind that for some time now, cars, well, not all cars, some cars have been fitted with what's known as post-collision braking, which automatically applies the brakes after a hard impact. It's helpful to know whether or not your car has that system. A question I rarely hear, and it is an important one, is can I use all automatics in the same way, or are they different? And the answer is kind of yes and no, because there is a method you could use which would work across all automatics and you would more or less be okay. But there are methods you can use which would work well with one type of automatic, but if you were to try and use that with a different kind, well, you could end up with a very expensive repair bill. For me to explain further, I need to separate the different kinds of automatic into 3 different groups. If you don't know the difference between the groups, don't worry. I can still help you understand how you can prevent yourself from damaging your gearbox. But knowing the groups can help. So here goes. Group 1, that's your torque converter style of automatic. That's the traditional automatic, and when people say automatic, really that's probably what they mean, because that is the technical term for them, and they include CVTs because they also have a torque converter. Then you get your clutch-based systems. They're known as automated gearbox. Not automatic, automated. Now, for me, in teaching people, that's not different enough. So I like to call them robotized manuals, because that's exactly what they are, and it's very descriptive. It's a manual gearbox mechanically under the bonnet. That's this hybrid just starting, if you heard that. So it's a manual gearbox under the bonnet that is controlled by a robot. That robot, which is actually just a little box, does your gears and clutch for you. You still only have 2 pedals, a go pedal and a brake pedal. Then you have the third group, electric cars, and that includes plug-in hybrids and cars like this, which is a full self-charging hybrid, which at the moment is self-charging, which is why the engine has turned on, so I can keep my air conditioning, because it is a bit stuffy today. Now, if you're not an experienced driver and experienced at trying these different kinds of automatics and you're not into cars, you're probably not going to tell the difference between the first 2 groups. You will probably know if you've got an electric car though, group 3, because, well, you have to plug it in unless it's a self-charging one, but then there's probably a hybrid label on it. Now, how to avoid damaging it. This is what you need to know. I'm going to put the car into D for drive. In some cars it will be A for auto, but whatever setting is needed to make the car want to go forwards, and I'm going to leave the handbrake on. Now watch this background and how this car moves in relation to the background. When I come off the foot brake, you may notice the front of the car lifts slightly and the back drop. I'm going to come off the foot brake now, just watch, coming off now. See that? It dips at the back and raised at the front, and that's because it's front wheel drive, and the electric motor is trying to turn the front wheels, but the handbrake is operating the rear wheels, and it's kind of like trying to pull its bottom along the floor. So it kind of does that as it tries to move forward. So you can see here that the battery is sending electricity to the electric motor to power the front wheels, but the parking brake is on, so the rear wheels aren't moving. Now, if I press the foot brake, you'll see the computer goes, oh, you don't want to go, and it cuts power. If I come off the foot brake again, the computer goes, oh, you want to go, and it sends power to the wheels, but we're not going anywhere. 0 miles an hour because the handbrake is on. Now, I'm not worried about this because this doesn't damage an electric motor. What it does do is it wastes electricity. So if I put my foot on the brake, that will stop it wasting electricity. Or if I put it in park, then I don't have to hold my foot on the foot brake. If I had an automatic with a torque converter, again, I wouldn't be worried because torque converters are designed to do this. But if I had an automatic that is a robotized manual, well, they have a clutch or two. Some have 2 clutches, some have 1. So it won't be an electric motor trying to move the car with the handbrake on. It won't be a torque converter trying to move the car with the handbrake on. It will be a clutch. And well, I'll give you between 30 seconds and 2 minutes before your clutch is toast. When a clutch gets to a certain temperature, it burns very quickly. It turns to dust and smoke, and it may heat up so much that it actually damages the flywheel as well. And that's not going to likely cost less than £1,000 to replace, probably a lot more. Now, some systems are smarter than this. Some systems will go, oh, the handbrake's on, let's not send power to the wheels. But some systems aren't that smart, and they do. You are in drive with the handbrake on, off the foot brake, it's sitting there trying to pull the car forwards. So my best bit of advice when it comes to driving an automatic, when it comes to being stationary in an automatic, because that's what this video is about, it's about being stationary, do you use park or whatever, is if you are stationary, don't be in drive with the handbrake on and off the foot brake. If you're in drive and you're not moving, make sure you're on the foot brake. What about neutral though? Well, if you have a torque converter automatic, you can just leave it in drive with your foot on the foot brake. There's no real benefit to using neutral. Maybe you might save a little bit of fuel, but if your car has stop start and the engine's off, well, it won't make any difference because your engine's off anyway. If you have an old car with a torque converter automatic though, like 20 plus years ago, sometimes when you're in drive with your foot on the foot brake, the car can vibrate a bit. And sometimes putting it into neutral can get rid of some of those vibrations, and it may just save you a tiny bit of fuel. Also, it's easy to select neutral in an automatic. You don't even have to push the button in. At least I haven't had to push the button in the cars I've used. You just push it forwards to neutral and backwards to drive again when you want to get going. What about robotized manuals? Neutral with those is actually quite a good idea, because when you're in drive with your foot on the brake, your clutch release bearing is permanently spinning. Now, if you do a normal mix of driving between town, motorway, country roads, your release bearing is probably not going to fail before your friction disc of the clutch. But if you do a lot of town driving, you're a taxi driver or a driving instructor, your release bearing gets hammered. And the more you use neutral, the longer it will last. And maybe it will last just long enough that it doesn't fail before the friction disc. Generally, the release bearing is 20 to 100 pounds, but to replace it, it costs a lot to get to it. And when you replace it, you replace all 3 components of the clutch, the release bearing, the friction disc, and the pressure plate. And you may even end up replacing the flywheel as well whilst you're there, because it's worth it because the labor it takes to get there. So you want to try and make sure that the cheapest part of your clutch does last the time the rest of the clutch, lasts as long as the rest of the clutch, is what I'm trying to say. But if you have stop-start system and the engine's off, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if you're in drive, your foot on the brake, because the engine's not spinning. So the release bearing's not spinning. It's pushed up against the pressure plate, but it's not really doing anything. If you have a hybrid though, like this, it's best not to use neutral. Neutral in this is really to push the car with the engine off if you need to. When you're driving, you leave it in drive with your foot brake on. When it's in neutral, the hybrid system can't work. The engine can't charge the battery, therefore you're not going to be getting your maximum efficiency by letting the hybrid system and the computer do what it's programmed to do. There's actually a button on this car called hold. If I press that when I'm in drive, it allows me to come off the foot brake and it will hold the car still until I press the gas. Should you use park when you're stationary in traffic? Well, it's not what park is designed for. Park is designed for parking. Some robotized manuals don't even have a park setting. They have neutral and you have to rely on the handbrake. What park does is it locks the transmission so that the wheels can't turn. And some people say, well, that's good. You should use park in traffic, so if someone hits you from behind, you're less likely to go forwards. But most hits from behind are generally quite mild, quite gentle. And if your car is in park, when someone hits you, you're going to put your transmission under a great deal of strain and you may even break something. So using park in traffic, well, that can be quite expensive. If you're parking on a steep hill, you probably want to get your handbrake to take the weight of the car instead of your parking pawl. If you don't know what I mean, I'm going to explain now. When you put your drive selector into park, there's this thing called the parking pawl pin that goes into the parking gear. That locks the transmission and stops the car from moving. The parking pawl pin, it's about the thickness of my index finger actually, something like that, and it goes into the pawl gear like this. But most of the time, it doesn't actually go in first time. It goes here, and then when you come off the foot brake, the car rolls and click, it clicks into place and the car suddenly stops. And it's your transmission that's stopping the car from rolling down the hill. It's your parking pawl that stops your car from moving. I'll show you that now. So I'm going to go into park, and when I come off the foot brake, you'll see the car roll back suddenly and then suddenly stop, usually quite harshly, as the parking pawl clicks into place. There's no cushioning there, it's metal on metal. So here we go, just roll back. And there we go, it's rolled and then suddenly stopped. It can be better or worse, it depends where that pin is before you come off the foot brake. It might even go in first time. The problem with this is that now the weight of the car is being held by the transmission and by your engine mounts. Now your transmission and engine mounts are strong, they can take a lot of torque. This should be no sweat for them whatsoever. But the trouble is how long does your car stay parked? And if you park for long periods of time on hills, your transmission is under strain permanently. It's not a lot of strain, but it's permanent strain. And as your engine mounts get older, the rubber inside them, that can get brittle and that can fail earlier if you're putting them under pressure. So this advice may save you a bit of money, but many people use the parking pawl on hills for years and have no problems at all. So this really is minor advice. It may help, but it may not. It's worth doing. I don't do it unless I am on a steep hill. This is how you make your handbrake take the weight of the car instead of your parking pawl. So I'm going to move forward slightly just to make sure the car isn't already leaned over on the suspension, just to loosen things up as it was earlier. There we go. So now I'm starting again in drive with my foot on the brake. I've just pulled over at the side of the road and I've stopped on this hill. So what I want to do, pull the handbrake up, put it into neutral. Now, when I come off the foot brake, the handbrake will take the weight of the car. You'll see the car will shift back a little bit as the suspension moves, as the handbrake takes the weight. There we go. And then foot on the brake again into park. And now your parking pawl is ready to take over if the handbrake fails, but it's not resting. The weight of the car isn't resting on it. To pass the driving test in Great Britain, you don't have to use the handbrake when you're waiting in traffic. You do have to use the handbrake though when you have parked. You can use the handbrake in traffic if you like, and you can certainly use the handbrake if you're trying to do a hill start in a manual car, but you don't have to. To pass the driving test, you need to be safe and legal. And part of being safe and legal is being in full control of your car. But the method you use to maintain control of your car, well, that's flexible. That's up to you. As long as you're in good control and you're safe and legal, then you should pass. Well, I hope this video has helped you learn when to use neutral or parked when you're driving an automatic car. If it has, please give the video a thumbs up. And if you're looking for car insurance, check out the links to Collingwood and Confused in the description. If you're learning to drive and want to insure yourself on somebody else's car, then Collingwood are there for you because you can do so without affecting the owner's policy. Now that can take away a big stress from the owner of that car that you're using to learn to drive. Via the link at the moment, there's up to 35% off and a £20 Amazon gift card. If you want to insure your own car though, I recommend checking out the link to confused.com, because you fill out one quote form and get loads of quotes back from many insurers to compare who's cheapest. But also, you can change your car on that quote as many times as you like and recalculate to see how much it costs to insure different cars without having to do the whole quote again. And that is a quick way to compare how much it costs to insure cars if you're shopping around. Using the links doesn't cost you anything, but it does support the channel, so thank you very much. Subscribe to get my future videos, and until the next one, cheerio.